Please welcome to the stage California Lieutenant Governor Eleni Kounalakis and Jewish Federation Los Angeles President and CEO Rabbi Noah Farkas.
Good morning, everyone. It is really great to see you again. I think it's on. You want to give it a test?
Good morning, Rabbi.
Okay, good, perfect. Okay. Well, I want to begin this morning, and those who work at our federation know that I always do this, is we begin with gratitude. So, Lieutenant Governor, for those of you who don't know, Ambassador Kounalakis is the 50th Lieutenant Governor of the state of California, the first woman to be elected to that position. An incredible advocate, an incredible housing developer. She was part of AKT Housing to help develop housing across California for many years, and now in public service again. But I want to begin with gratitude. I think many of us remember after October 7th and how terrified we were, how besieged we felt as a community, disoriented, and we, the Federation, along with a number of others, arranged a rally and a march on Pico Boulevard in Los Angeles. And you were the highest-ranking elected official to co-marshal that march. And you marched with us right after, and you never said thank you publicly. So I wanted to say thank you and begin with that. Feel free to respond anytime. This is a fireside chat. It's not really supposed to be an interview. I have a few notes, but I wanted to begin, though, with a serious question. We heard last night from a public school teacher from Long Beach and two students, one in middle school and one in high school at two schools in California, of feeling menaced in their schools. We hear continuously from the ADL, who shares with us the number of anti-Semitic incidences and crimes against Jews in the Jewish community. It seems like every day, if not every week, there are celebrities, there are institutions, etc., that really have given us a loss of a sense of grounding and stability here in California. And as one of the highest-ranking elected officials of one of the largest economies in the world and of the most populous state in the Union, I have to ask, is California still a safe place for Jews?
Wow. Well, good morning, Rabbi Farkas. It's so good to be with you. It's so great to be here with all of you. I've been in the past, but I think this is the largest gathering that you've had, certainly in a while. And congratulations on the new branding, Jewish California. I love it. I love the symbols. I think that probably the best way to really respond to that is by looking around this room and seeing the response from the Jewish communities. There's no question that California, like largely across the country, there's been this surge in anti-Semitism. And by the way, it started before October 7th. It was one of the first things when I was elected and had my first meeting at the Board of Regents that I understood there was this shift that was happening, and having just come back from Hungary was really chilling to me, enough so that I picked up the phone and called my former colleagues who were at the Holocaust Museum in Washington to say there's something happening in our university system here, and what are we doing to address it? And I think that certainly after October 7th and the war with Gaza, everything just sort of escalated out of control. And so to hear that you had students talking about the feeling of lack of safety is deeply upsetting to me, as I know it is to all of you, as it should be to anyone and everyone in this state. At the same time, your advocacy has already made a big difference, because AB 715, as was mentioned earlier by David, is the most comprehensive, the most impactful legislation that has ever been adopted anywhere in the United States to combat anti-Semitism, and that is happening here in California. So the escalation is real, the threat is real, but the response, and that has largely been led by the people in this room. I think Anita Friedman, my friend from San Francisco, is here. Rich Lieb is here as well. Is that right, Rich? Former chair of the UC Regents. The hours, the expertise, the work, the strength that you've brought to the table in order to be able to affect this change has been impactful, and it must continue.
Thank you for that. A couple years ago, you were on this stage with my colleague, and we kind of focused at that time on the inconsistent responses of college campuses, faculty, etc. There were a number of bills that were passed, and that we helped, the Jewish California, we as a coalition helped pass to help sort of rein some of that in. I would love a progress update from a campus perspective specifically about what progress are you seeing on campuses, what progress are you seeing in that area?
Well, it's been a lot. And I think when we look back at the protests, to me, what I understood was happening essentially is we had been relying on norms for a long time, of norms of behavior and a general agreement of what was acceptable from students and from faculty and what was not acceptable. And norms were not enough when the kinds of outbreaks of outrageous behavior and statements started to happen. And essentially, our campuses were just simply woefully unprepared to deal with it. And I'm not proud. I don't think anyone associated with our system of public higher education, particularly the UCs, should look back on that time with anything other than shamefulness of the inability to respond quickly and definitively to address the kind of anti-Semitic language and behavior that was happening. What I think we can be proud of is the response. And it took time, but behind the scenes, it started quickly. And again, is Rich here? Is Rich Lieb here? Rich, stand up. He's just about the most humble person you will find, but I can tell you that the work that was required to get the new, comprehensive standing up of the Office of Civil Rights in the Office of the President at the UC, the new framework for the anti-discrimination policy that was adopted. It waded into very, very complicated, complex, difficult territory over freedom of speech and all of that. And he was able to navigate that to a point where we now have this framework in place that has put clear guidelines, clear really teeth into a framework that protects the civil rights of Jewish students. It was not easy, but what we have seen since its adoption is that the kinds of incidences that we had in the past, in spite of the escalation of the conflicts in the Middle East, those occurrences have been deeply diminished. And it has now come because we have a clear framework of what is acceptable and what isn't, and that it's been done in a way that has satisfied the test of not interfering with, the basic elements of freedom of speech that have made this country great. So,
adding my thanks to Rich for the hard work. In fact, the University of California is a sponsor of this conference. They're all over there. Can you guys wave and say, we want to say thank you for becoming involved. I have like a million questions for you because this is so complex. But here in Los Angeles, where we're based, as sort of the convener of the Jewish community of Los Angeles, the largest Jewish philanthropy west of the Mississippi. Our federation is deeply invested in our city council, in our mayoral race. In fact, I met with the mayor just last week. There seems to be some litmus tests that are occurring through this election cycle, especially ahead of the primary. And in an overly weighted Democratic state, there seems to be real questions. And earlier this year, there were serious questions, questionnaires put out by a series of unions, including coming after Jewish California directly. Could you just talk about what you're seeing as an evolution of the Democratic Party and how the Jewish community should respond to it, be active in it, given just how strong the Democratic Party here is in California?
Wow. All right. Well, that's a big.
You told me to ask you anything.
You can ask, of course. I started out as a kid working in the building here. I worked for the Greek American member of the Senate, Nick Petras, back in the 80s, and then worked for Robert Matsui, the first Japanese American to serve in Congress representing Sacramento. And I've seen a lot of evolution in the Democratic Party platform. And one of the things that has really struck me and that I've thought has been really problematic, not just for the Democrats, but really for the American people, is this lack of understanding of international affairs and the basic understanding of what's important for U.S. national security. You know, we take it for granted that, you know, we're safe and that we're insulated from the kinds of disruptions and horrors that come with the collapse of society into war. And we're not. And so I guess what I try to emphasize within my party is, and again, this comes not just from my lifelong member of being a Democrat, but because I had the privilege of serving in the Obama administration as a United States ambassador, and I read classified information for 4 years, and I understand these things now, I think, pretty well. But we as a party, my party, we have to level set on a couple of very basic things. One is that Israel has a right to exist, and two, that Israel has a right to defend itself. So my hope is that this will take hold and that within our party we can get back to that basic. Because, I mean, there's a lot to back that up, but even at just the most basic level for Americans, we have to know who our allies are, who our responsible allies are, and the underpinning of the alliances, which fundamentally is our shared values. And even though people may disagree and have issues, and I'm sure even in this room, with the leadership of Israel, with the way that this war is going, that fundamentally it is indisputable that the United States, our allies, including Israel, share fundamental values of liberty and freedom. So I really do hope that we are going to be able to level set on that basic. And I think that California, we're so far away from Washington that it's even further removed for people understanding our national security.
I really appreciate that. So let's go back to the beginning. How did you get into public service? You were incredibly smart, incredibly strategic. You could have done a million things. How did you get into public service, and why do you continue to support the Jewish community, and why is that so important to you?
Well, thank you for the question, Rabbi. So, I've been thinking a lot about Hungary lately with the recent elections there. I'm sure you're all following. But it goes way back. So I am ethnically Greek, almost entirely. I don't know 98%, according to my genetic testing, from one very, very small part of Greece, the Peloponnese. And my family story, my husband's family story, was very much shaped by the Second World War. Our home in the village did not have running water, did not have electricity. My grandmother was illiterate. This is the home my father grew up in, still in our family, but it had a second floor. And there were Nazis who were stationed in that small village, and they occupied the top floor of their house. My husband's family, his father and 3 brothers, the 4 Kounalakis boys, all of them were extremely active in the underground resistance on the island of Crete. So our stories, those that Marcus and I grew up with, were very much about that conflict. My aunt became a nun when she was in her 30s. She moved to Jerusalem. She lived in the cloisters right next to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Her nightly activity was holding vigil inside the tomb of the Holy Sepulchre. So I visited her many, many, many times. And over that course of our lives, this understanding, I think that there's so much in terms of the underpinning of values that Greeks and the Greek traditions and the Jewish traditions have overlapped with. And so when I landed in Hungary, I came with that kind of foundation. And then I had 3.5 years of living in this country that had this largely unrevealed, under the surface history and chapter of the Jewish community, and then, of course, one of the most horrific chapters of the Holocaust. And, I had a friend, her name is Aranka Siegel. Aranka is 95 now, but she was a pretty vibrant early 80s when she and I spent many, many days and hours together. She told me her story. She stood on the platform at Auschwitz at 13 years old. The depth of that experience of meeting so many survivors, understanding, right before I went to Hungary, a friend of mine from San Francisco, a lawyer I did a lot of work with, and he knew I was going to Hungary. We'd never really talked about his story. He gave me a stack of books of the Hungarian Holocaust, or the chapter of the Shoah of Hungary. And I brought them with me, and they sat in my office. And I thought, I don't want to read those right away. I want to understand the current, the country as it is today, and then I'm going to go back into history. But it infiltrated absolutely everything. And to me, it was a question I wanted to understand how. How could it be that the former Austro-Hungarian Empire, a place where, because of the contributions of the Jews starting in the late 19th century, developed this world, capital of an empire, the symphonies, the science, the Nobel laureates, the explosion of technology at the time and the industrialization of the time, how could it collapse to people in the most cold-blooded and mechanized way imaginable, bring children to their deaths? How? And I spent 4 years studying this and understanding it. And so when I had that moment in my first days as lieutenant governor, seeing this rise of anti-Semitism in places and among people who knew nothing about the history. And it was so chilling to me. And I felt that maybe there was a reason why I had had this pathway, and that someone who's not Jewish could be in a position to be able to fight anti-Semitism from the experiences that I had had in my early life, and then as a former United States ambassador to Hungary. And I've taken that role to heart, and I hope that it has been helpful.
Thank you for that. Just as a little anecdote of history, I shared how our family got here. There was a portion of our family that stayed back in Hungary, and many of them were murdered by the Arrow Cross in Hungary as part of the Hungarian Holocaust. So I appreciate the understanding, because when you think about it, human culture, societies, we think they're immutable. We think that they're forever. We think that the structures we've built we take for granted, and yet Hungary, Germany, Europe, the heart of enlightenment, the most important university system in the world at the time, completely collapsed under a fantasy of a utopia built on hate. And that can very much happen here. So thinking as one last question for you.
But we're not going to let it.
Well, that's what I'm setting you up for that. California is the state of dreams. It's where people came to this country and moved west, or landed in San Francisco and started coming east, indigenous people that lived here. It is a place of immense prosperity, immense disparity. It is a place where many of the best ideas for the United States begin. It is the Eureka state, the state of epiphany. Give us some hope. What should we be dreaming about for a state of California, for ourselves, for our children, for our parents, grandparents, and for our communities?
I'll give you one touch point that's been really inspiring to me lately. I met this young man recently. His name is Ryan Holiday, and he grew up in the Sacramento region. He went off to college at a CSU in Southern California, and then he dropped out of school because he discovered the teachings of Marcus Aurelius and the Stoics. He now has this pretty significant presence on social media. He goes by the handle The Daily Stoic. Now, Ryan, Stoicism, of course, was established in Greece. It was carried forward. Marcus Aurelius was very much a believer in Stoicism and wrote his famous work, Meditations, which survived through so many years. And now you have a kid who grew up here who stumbles across this book and is bringing these teachings, not just of Stoicism, by the way, but of Aristotelian philosophy, Greek philosophy, carrying it forward to a whole new generation of Americans. And it is all based on virtue and values and the meaning of life and why you should be a good person and why you should care about others. And it is also not connected to any of the organized religious traditions, which we know that can be very difficult for this next generation to necessarily come to on their own. It just gives me incredible hope. Again, also great pride, because I'm a student of ancient Greek philosophy, and that philosophy predated Christianity and didn't, is in some ways kind of interwoven, but very much separate, and does not rely on a religious underpinning, but is a very, very compelling code of conduct. And so when I see the fact that ideas and values that transcend millennia can be carried forward and elevated again, that gives me just tremendous hope. And that it would come from a young person growing up in California with no connection, by the way, whatsoever to it other than the human connection, that gives me tremendous hope. And what also gives me hope is, when I was sitting this morning and listening to the invocation, the Rabbi Kanevsky, when in the very difficult context that the Jewish community and Jewish California finds yourself in right now, that you're talking about Americans losing SNAP benefits. You're talking about Americans losing health care, telling the story of Abraham and Sarah, connecting that to the fact that we don't just look in a completely insular way. Of course, we have to think about, the existential crises that we find ourselves in, but that we never stop thinking about others. That gives me hope. And I think there is more of that than there is of those things that bring us despair. And I think that is why this room is so full today, and certainly why I'm very proud to be in it.
We thank you. We thank you for your years of service. We thank you for standing up for the right kinds of values, and we thank you for your allyship. Please give her another round of applause.